All right, so first of all, if you don't know me, I'm Marty Semmel. I'm the superintendent of schools here in Trumbull, and I just want to thank everybody for coming out here to our fourth community conversation about our master plan, our master facilities plan work. I'm going to be turning the mic over to the folks from Tecton who have been working with all this year to put this work together. I do see a number of folks, elected officials who are here, so we have a number of Board of Education members who are here tonight. Thank you. I also see we have a whole contingency of Board of Finance members here, so thank you for coming out. Ms. Tesoro, our first selectman, is here, so thank you for being here, and a number of families. So obviously I was hoping for a little bit even more participation in this, but that's okay. This being our fourth opportunity, our real focus is on trying to make sure we get input from the community, because these are your schools, and we want to make sure that your input to what you want your schools to be. So tonight, Jeff will walk you through a host of slides. He has a team here as well. And then there'll be some time, I'm sure, throughout the presentation, like we've done each time, for there to be some back and forth conversation. This is not the final time for input, and Jeff will be talking more about that. But again, thanks for coming here. We look forward to the conversation and this opportunity. So, Jeff, and there will be a time later where we can ask questions. And did you want folks to come up to right up to the? Okay, so I'll just move the mic up a little bit and make it a little bit easier for folks to talk when we get to that point.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jeff Wazinski. I'm a principal at Tecton Architects. We're running into a little bit of color issues on the projector, so they're trying to fix that as we speak, but I think I'm gonna move along with the presentation anyway, and hopefully they can fix it on the fly. So thank you, Dr. Semmel, for the introduction. This is the format of this evening's presentation. I just want to go over some introductions, who's been involved in the project. We'll talk a little bit about where we've been, where we are today, and then where we're headed with this master plan. And along the way, what we'll try to do is offer opportunities for discussion. Most of the discussion tonight is going to revolve around the options. And for those that are new, we'll try to give you a brief overview. For those that have been to all four of our community forums, which I see many familiar faces, thank you. And I'm sorry for the repeat, but we'll try to keep that one brief. So the folks that are involved and are here tonight: Eddie Wadowski, project manager, sitting in the front. Antonia is supporting our technical group back there, but we'll go over some of the community interaction, and then Brad, MEP engineer from CES. We also have, as part of our team, our consultant team, McKibben Demographics. They did the enrollment projections and forecasting, as well as some other support staff that walked through the buildings. Of course, we walked through all 13 buildings, spoke to leadership in each of the buildings, and this is basically a snapshot of the folks that have been involved. Many, many more than just on this list, but believe me, we've had many conversations throughout this process, and we'll have many more as we move ahead. So the key components to our work were three, right? Existing conditions, so we looked at the physical condition code, programmatic needs, is the building serving the programmatic, the educational need that exists today? And then we tried to prioritize those pieces, and we'll get into that in a moment. The demographics, or the forecasting, we looked at for highest projected enrollment. We compared allowable areas as per state standards, looked at usable space and capacity standards. So there's a lot of benchmarking statistical information as a part of that, but there's a couple summary slides that will touch upon that. And then obviously tonight we're talking about the options, and we'll talk a lot more about that. So if you are new to the process, no worries. We've posted all of the studies, all of our presentations, the PDFs on the project website. And of course, if you have questions, we encourage you to email them in. We've received a few, and we've tried to respond tonight in some of the graphics with those questions. So please stay informed and engaged as best as possible. So where we've been, we're going to talk a little bit about the project goals. Antonia will go over the feedback that we received at the community forums and the surveys that we had. I'll touch upon the summary, demographics, the data, and how we analyzed it objectively, and then how we created the project tiers, which I'm sure will be a topic of discussion tonight. So on the left side of the screen, our scope, I mentioned, age, condition, programmatic need and capacity utilization, where we have the forecast, and then this is a long-range master plan, right? So that means 15, 20 years minimum. So I encourage the group to think generationally. These projects don't happen tomorrow, even though you'll see larger numbers this evening. You have to think about the time frame for which those can be implemented, all right? So again, frame of reference there. The goal is to get a prioritization that we all can agree on based on an objective analysis, but also your feedback and input. We really want to develop a plan that alleviates the capacity concerns in the buildings, and primarily in the elementary and the middle schools. And we can get into that discussion in a bit more detail. And then, as we have in the past, and we do currently, provide consistent and transparent feedback during this interactive process. So, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Antonia to walk through some of the feedback.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jeff. All right, so we always start with the why behind the project, building on everything that Jeff just shared. We are also evidence-based design drives our approach, and modern research in terms of 21st century learning, how the psychology and the influence of space impacts behavior, student thinking, and performance. So we envelop all of this into our design thinking as we're exploring plans. So research really is the foundation behind which we build. And ultimately, it's most important for our students and teachers who really deserve these quality spaces. Community engagement that we've done so far, there have been BOE workshops. This is the fourth of 4 community conversations, and again, all of the presentations. A few of those have been recorded, so those recordings are posted on the website, and there are additional upcoming opportunities to stay engaged. And you'll notice that along the way we've been building, so conversation 1 was very big picture, greenfield thinking, and then as we've gotten deeper and deeper into the process, the conversations have gotten more and more detailed, and tonight will be the most detailed of them all. The digital tools that we've been exploring, we did a community survey a while back, and we have folded that data into this presentation. The project website, again, is a living space for you to go. It's an ongoing, ever-building resource. And the project email is also there for you if you have questions, ways to connect with the team. So what's coming up next is you'll see a lot of options tonight. You'll hear a lot of information, see a lot of numbers. So we'll be following up in the next week or so with our second community survey, because we're really interested to understand which of these options or which of the elements within those options you'd like to see prioritized. We'll prepare some short videos to better familiarize you with the different options themselves, and then we'll continue to update the various boards in town. So we'll go through each community conversation that we've had, starting with the most recent all the way back to community conversation number 1. At community conversation 3, we were presenting initial options as we had brainstormed them to gauge the feedback of the room and start to decide what direction the community was initially leaning towards. We had comment cards at that session, as we do tonight outside the main doors, so feel free to write your feedback there. We also had just an initial survey of the room, as you can see, where folks could start to just initially tell us option 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at that point, which one they had which one they were gravitating towards. Some of the questions that we got were largely around demographics. If there are, are the new developments planned in town included in the forecast, underscoring the importance of health and environmental equity in the schools and the indoor air quality and thermal comfort. Again, a question about the elementary population, as you'll see in the demographics, is shown to grow. So just we're clarifying that, and any security measures, all important. School safety and security, what new technologies and innovations are being implemented. And then we had some general questions about big picture thinking. What if we reduce? What if we expand? What if we redistrict? That continued, so we had additional, I think these are much the same, questions about whether we build new or renovate as new. What's the difference there? Are there ongoing town projects that we should be considering and factoring in? Are those folded into the process? Yes, absolutely. What is swing space? How are we leveraging that to maximize reimbursement? And then with 13 total buildings, to Jeff's point, is this happening all at once? What's the order? So lots of great questions there. There were also questions that we had answered at community conversation too that we had received prior to that. Things about which buildings are fully sprinklered and which ones have adequate and compliant air conditioning. So you can see that the buildings without full sprinklers were Hillcrest, Reach, and Long Hill, and the ones that are adequately and compliant with air conditioning are Tech Ec, Frenchtown, and AgriScience. And you'll see some of this information folded into the tier structure. We also got a great question about thinking outside of Trumbull. What are other districts doing? How can we benchmark ourselves? Are there any examples to share so that we can consider what they've done as we're making our own decisions? So we shared a few of those. Simsbury had a first best step approach. They really leaned towards a 6th grade addition at the middle school and a renovate like new for that project, and for the elementary school as their first step. And then they built from there. And you can see other districts and the costs associated with those projects on the right-hand side. Community conversation number 1 was our big picture thinking event. So you can see this is a lot looser. The comment cards are shown on the right. We also had a prioritization board where folks could grab a sticker and tell us generally which was their major priority. So you can see 21st century learning, sustainability, and building efficiency and safety and security all rose to the top. So in terms of community feedback, these are the results from that first community survey. And we had 390 plus responses. The big takeaway from that survey was that the majority of folks do see a need to improve the physical condition of Trumbull's public schools. The greatest need identified by the community was at Booth Hill, Hillcrest, and Madison. And the community identified some of the lowest needs at Tech Ec, Frenchtown, AgriScience, and the high school. And as you'll see in the priority tiers, this doesn't mean that there are no needs at these schools. We're certainly addressing the whole portfolio of buildings. But we're trying to think holistically about the district and the equity involved and how we tackle these in what order. BOE feedback, again, from that first conversation and ongoing conversations, safety and security rose to the top, district-wide equity, access to natural daylight, thermal comfort, inclusivity, some of the health and wellness for students, all of these things rose to the top. And what was great was in subsequent community conversations, we found alignment between the Board of Education, the administration, and the community on these topics. I'm going to give it back to Jeff.
Thanks, Antonia. So for those that have sat with us before, this slide is familiar to you. It's really just a summary slide of all 13 of your buildings, the 1.1 million square feet, and basically the percentage of what that building is to your total portfolio, original construction, and then the age, and then just kind of taking a look at the average age of your overall portfolio of schools. So we do want to make it a point where, the buildings have been maintained and creatively used and reused. So in most instances where we walked through the buildings, they were using every square inch, whether it was a converted storage room or repurposing former classrooms into special educational spaces. A large majority of the buildings were used to their optimum efficiency. So buildings have been well maintained, well used, used, and overall, you got good use out of them over their time period. The common findings around the buildings, and you can see this in the report, is things like today, unfortunately, we have to look at, site boundaries, identifying those, making sure there's proper barriers from a school safety and infrastructure perspective. Indoor air quality came up again and again, accessibility, and often in several different sites. A lot of the building systems are either at or past their useful life, so we won't get into the nitty-gritty of the existing conditions, but when you hear useful life, something like a boiler, if a boiler lasts 35 to 40 years and it's 60 years, it's past its useful life. Do you have to replace it? No, but you should start thinking about it and incorporate it into your plan. So those are some of the examples. So there's a lot of numbers, a lot of information on this slide, and what we did, and we'll go back to that summary in a second because that's how we got to the tiers, but analyzing the existing conditions and the methodology. As I mentioned, two topics, physical needs and physical condition. So we grouped the buildings in obviously K5, 6, 8, 9, 12. We walked through the buildings, collected it, and analyzed the information engineers included. We ranked those based on our findings across the district, and then prioritized those based on both a combination of programmatic and physical need. So when you look through the report and some of the previous presentations, if you think about the rating, similar to a movie rating, the more stars you have, the better off you are. So we tried to keep it, there's a lot of information, a lot of detailed information in the full report, but we tried to summarize it in a way that it was easily digestible. So the work that we've done, I mentioned the 13 buildings, walked through all of them. We grouped them into categories like site, architectural exterior, interior, code, accessibility, life safety, and then building systems, which means your plumbing, HVAC, electrical, so on and so forth, data infrastructure as well. And then we had several different meetings with BOE, the PTA. We had a virtual meeting as well to try to solicit some feedback. The demographics, which we have a summary slide on, we had our demographer look at the entire district, and the net takeaway really is the enrollments are steady and steadily increasing in the elementary grade levels if you start to look at the detail. So that's if you are in any of the elementary schools, they are, if you're feeling that pinch, a large majority of your elementary schools are feeling that because there is an steadily increasing enrollment. And then we looked at the usable areas of the building, a lot of data here, but essentially boiling it down is really looking at the buildings, current population, proposed population, and the highest 8-year average, and looked at the actual capacity of the building for based on the state standards. So the way that we analyze those buildings is based upon those regulations, because that's directly tied to the reimbursement that you would get back from the state. So then we also walked through all the various different core spaces and benchmarked those, and things like the gyms, auditoriums, cafeterias, and media centers. So the demographics in short, and I know we had some dialogue at the last community conversation about it, and the first bullet on this slide represents that. They will slowly and steadily increase in the next 10 years. So obviously as that cohort works its way through your district, you'll feel the pinch at the elementary school first, then through middle, and then of course to the high school. It's partly due to the empty nest households, so those free up and younger families move in, and that's what we've seen in other communities across the state. And then we also did analyze, and we understand there's some multi-unit housing construction going on right now, and that was incorporated into the demographics as best we can. What we've seen in some communities are that for the more senior folks that live in town, those apartments, whether they're condos or rentals, schools become attractive because they want to stay close to the family, so they'll move into those. It's a little bit different than what you would think as having younger families moving into these market rate housing. But what that does is it frees up more homes for younger families to move in. So that phenomenon has taken place in some communities that we've worked in throughout Connecticut. So the summary, the highest enrollments that we look at over that 10-year span is 8-year for reimbursement. You see the elementary school plus 67, middle school, and then the high school. So the focus on the options is looking at building some flexibility in the elementary and middle level at this point. So again, I told you I'd get back to this slide. This slide represents how we arrived at our tiers, how we put the buildings in tier 1, 2, and 3. So we looked at the first column, if you will, is the programmatic need, and there's a variety of different categories that you total up to get your points, and then we ranked them, and then basically the lower number means poor, so 1 means poor and 5 means good. So when you start looking at programmatic need compared to physical condition and capacity, you arrive at an average priority, and that's how we arrived at that. Now, there's been some conversation about maybe we look harder at the geographic location of some of these buildings. We can certainly look at that as well. But what happens is, and here's the summary of that, and I know this is up for debate too, and we'd love to hear more feedback on this, is tier 1, just based on those categories, based on programmatic and existing condition. You have Booth Hill, Hillcrest, Daniels Farm, Reach, and Long Hill. And then tier 2, you have Middlebrook, Jane Ryan, Tashua, and Madison. And then in tier 3, the high school, Frenchtown, Tech Ec, and Agri-Science. And one thing I want to make sure we point out is tier 1 and tier 2 are closer than you think together. When you start looking at those real numbers, they're closer. And tier 3 is a bit further out. So it's not a coin flip between tier 1 and tier 2s. We did it objectively, but certainly we can modify that with further conversation. So what does it look like geographically in your district? So that's the boundaries of Trumbull. Those are the districts for the elementary schools. So tier 1 is in the orange, tier 2 is in the blue, and tier 3 is in the green. So then we started this conversation at the tail end of community conversation 2 and spoke a lot about it during the community conversation number 3, looking at new builds, renovate as news, looking at capital improvement projects. What kind of combinations should we be looking at? Could we be looking at? So before we move to the next phase, if there's any questions, I would encourage you to, on the material that we just reviewed, we can stop, take a pause, and discuss that now, or we can continue into the options. If you would be so kind to use the mic up at front, that would be helpful.
Richard White, 169 Churchill Road. First, thanks for all of this. This has been an awesome process to follow. I'm sorry that I missed your third. I tried several different ways to figure out how to be here on that date. I couldn't. I read the demographic study, and I have a request that you consider updating using the 2020 decennial census as that new data becomes available. This is a great opportunity to look in depth, and the demographer has done a great job, but a simple refresh of that, the models and the conclusions, seems like it would be pretty straightforward. I'd also like to ask, and I don't know if this is to you guys, the demographer, or the Board of Ed, to do a more fine-grained study for the last 3 to 10 years, if possible, of the school-age children in Trumbull, and looking for shifts into and out of the private schools to sort of get a better understanding of that. I've always felt that some of the swing that we see from year to year is partially explained by private school children and out-of-district magnet school children. And then on capacity analysis, assuming that we move forward with either option one or option two, does a redistrict, I wasn't sure I was reading the comment on redistricting today correctly. And if you could clarify that. But if we move forward with option one or two, if we redistrict today, before that work starts, do we reduce the need for swing space, temporary space, parking, or traffic during construction? So could we fix some problems now and give us better capacity during the construction? Thanks.
Great. Thank you for those questions. I'll take a swing at each of them. So the demographics using the updated 2020, as you remember, we didn't have that information. It's a valid request. We'll take that up with the district and our demographer to see. We want to use the latest and greatest information, the most helpful tools available to us. So we'll follow up on that one. The 3 to 10 year shifts in into and out of the district or into private school or homeschooling, I believe we have that data. I think if we could synthesize that data so that you can easily consume to see what's going on, we'll take a look at that. I think it's probably just buried in the report and probably not easy to find. So we'll look at that. And then as far as the capacity in redistricting, I won't speak to redistricting, but I will speak to capacity. If we're speaking strictly about the elementary schools, most are at capacity now. I think where there might be some advantage, there's a little bit of room in Frenchtown, but that wouldn't come without some pain, just to try to convert some of those rooms back to traditional classrooms. So there's not anywhere in any of the elementary schools an extra wing that isn't being utilized. I think when you look at the data and the deeper conversation that we had relative to each of those elementary schools, you'll find that we're pretty much right at capacity across the board, particularly when you look at the utilization of the building, how much of the actual square footage you can use for educational space in each building. So I wish I had a better answer on that, other than, said there's an extra wing here, we can move them in. But that's one of the challenges that you'll see in the options is swing space, right? And I've tried to articulate that as we build through. So thank you for your questions. Anybody? Oh, one more here.
I was just looking for a little clarification on, maybe I'm just ignorant here, but what REACH is. Is it a school or a program? It's not even listed on the list of schools on the Trumbull website, but I see it listed, and I see it as listed as on almost all the options as being combined with the administration building. So just a little clarification on that. Thanks.
Sure, I'll give the high level, and if Dr. Suma wants to give a more articulate answer, it's essentially an alternative space or program for students or individuals that need extra support in the middle, mostly high school grade level. Is that?
That's a pretty fair summary.
Yeah.
Unless you want more detail, we can go into it. It has about 20 students right now.
Yeah, about 15 to 20 students on average. So
The program houses that, or there's a building that houses that?
there's a building. If you go to the Madison Middle School, there's a building as you enter the site on the left-hand side that houses that program. And in that building, so we assessed that building from an aging condition programmatic, and that building is kind of high on the tiers, right? It's not in a great condition. So there's about 15 to 20 on average students in there, plus faculty and staff. So my guess is somewhere around 30 in total in that building. Is that, sure. Okay, so let's get into the main event here. So where we are today. So this slide, again, I'm not trying to aggravate people that have been at the last presentations, but I just want to remind them, when we look at the options, to the point that the gentleman just made, we want to make sure that we identify options as best we can that build in swing space. So when we're talking about renovations of this magnitude, we're not talking about going in after school, renovating it through the night and getting out before the students get in. We're talking about vacating a portion, a significant portion of school so that they can do a comprehensive renovation. If you want to choose the break fix kind of plan as you go, which is one of the options, you can look at, reducing the scope of each project to try to minimize impact, but swing space is a critical piece in considering any of the options that we're discussing tonight. Reimbursement. So we had a good question on reimbursement, both email and from the last several community forums. We'll use a term, renovate like new, that's a state term, RNV versus new. So you're around 34 and change, 34% back from the state for renovate is new and 10% less for new. I thought I used to understand the logic behind that, but that's what we use for reimbursement calculations. So nonetheless, we identify that in every single option, the cost, total project cost, and then the cost to your community. Value, when we talk about value, when we talk about complex phased renovations for a significant period of time, a new building, 80,000 square foot, traditionally takes about 18 months. If you were to renovate a phased occupied renovation of a same kind of space, it's almost going to take you double the amount of time. So there's nothing wrong with doing renovate versus new. It's just every dollar that you put in new, more is going to stay with that building than it does in a renovate as new, because you're paying for things like temporary conditions and temporary partitions, general conditions, those kinds of things along the way. So we have a slide on that if people are really interested in that analysis. Capacity, I spoke to that earlier. What we really want to do is, and we start to get to this towards the tail end of the options, like options 6 and 7, is try to figure out a way in some of these options where that first step buys some flexibility across the district and improves as many student, faculty, and staff's lives in the town of Trumbull as possible. And so when you do a renovate as you go, you're only affecting that neighborhood. Consideration or a combination of options where you impact more students with one project is something that we should consider. And then prioritization and affordability, those are all discussions that we welcome tonight. We want to hear the feedback. So the challenges and needs, again, getting back to on the left-hand side, the geographic location of Booth Hill, the buildings in yellow with the number 1 on them were the schools in greatest needs. The reason why you have Jane Ryan and Middlebrook as an alternative in white is that we've heard some feedback that maybe give some consideration to geographic region when you're talking about prioritization. Long Hill is well past its useful life due to aging condition. We understand it's administrative offices and it's not students and students first, but we wanted to make sure that we articulated and gave it's just due and that the aging condition of that building needs attention. And then to the gentleman's point earlier with the REACH program, if you do visit it and see it, it's in less than ideal environment for those students. And then lastly, some of the challenges geographically is the split east-west side of your town, and how do we handle that through the options? And it's not particularly easy. So other considerations, we know affordability and timeline, swing space and do nothing, maintain as is. So the costs, just kind of setting the table here for costs. I don't expect to go through all the detail that builds up to the numbers that you'll see tonight, but we can dive in if somebody asks the question. But they're based on mid-range historical averages, right? So this is what it costs for these kinds of projects. We've escalated them at a 4.5%, because we think that should be coming down to the potential midpoint of construction to 2026. So obviously, we're not going to escalate for 10, 12 years. We picked that number. Is that the right date? Don't know. We can talk about that more, but there is some escalation in the numbers that we carried to basically a 2026 time period, so 3 years out. We'll make some adjustments once there is a preferred option that kind of rises to the top. We didn't include any operational costs or savings, so we stuck to the building energy costs, those kinds of things. And then the reimbursement rate, there it is in the yellow on the bottom. Renovated News 34.29 and 24.29. So that works into every single one of the calculations that you'll see tonight. And I put a little caveat there because some of the communities that Antonia went over where it showed some large numbers, there's a term called special legislation and notwithstanding, where some communities, when they went through a larger building program, received either a change in their reimbursement rate or waivers on square footages. So I just want to make sure we give that caveat. Not going to go over all this, but when we talk about project costs, it's both construction and soft costs. So it's the hard costs, all your site, building, bricks and mortar, and on the right side, the soft costs, it's all your engineers that are sitting in front of you, everything that's loose in the building. If you turn a building upside down and you shake everything out, furniture, equipment, all that stuff. So when we talk about the numbers that you see tonight, it's soup to nuts, start to finish, turnkey project, which is typical of a renovate as new or new project. So renovate as new, what does it mean? It means that you comprehensively renovate the building and it'll last another 30 years minimum. We'll address all the capacity and educational and curriculum needs, so it'll completely reinvent the building to today's contemporary educational environment needs. As I mentioned, transforming them for flexibility, adaptability, and innovation, those kinds of things. And then it addresses, obviously, all the age, condition, code-related items that we have in our detailed report. So this is a detailed example. We went over this in community conversation number 3, and we did several different sites. Basically test fitting the sites, proving that if you in this particular example, you could build a new hillcrest if you wanted to on the site of the existing hillcrest and still make everything work logistically. So just a brighter version of that, where the yellow would be the new building, the orange dotted line would be the building that would be removed, and you could put parking in and separation, give back to some fields, stuff like that. So it's possible there. Again, this is a detailed example. We ran this detail, so this detail is behind all the numbers in every single project that's included in each of those options. And just real quick, on the left-hand side is how we get to the numbers, right? So the student population, size of building, what we're improving for the site, what we're doing for the building, any soft costs, phasing, those kinds of things. So when you look at the bottom of the sheet, if you're detail-oriented and numbers-oriented, total project costs are shown here, and then the blue is the estimated cost to Trumbull. So we've done that for every single one of our options, every single building within those options as well. So this is just an example of a renovate as new, same example, same chart, different numbers, gets you to those overall project costs. So here we are. The options. Just want to kind of set the table a little bit. I know I've said it a couple times, or we've said it a couple times already, but it's where the intent of the options is to address all the identified deficiencies, physical condition, program capacity. The prioritization that we put there is based on the tiers and objective look at our team looking at it with some input and feedback. The order can and will likely change. The scope will likely change. This plan is not finalized. Any of the options aren't finalized. And what you'll often see in bullet 3 is the preferred option becomes, well, I like a little bit of this, I like some of that. So it's a combination of several different options. So I guess what I'm telling you for this evening is I don't have the right answer for you tonight. I need the input from the entire community back. We need the input back so that we can fine tune this plan for your community. So costs then will be updated as we refine the plans. And then, as I mentioned, think generational. I encourage you. It's a long-range plan. So even if you started today with projects, a grant application, it takes 4 to 5 years to go through that process, to design the building and to build the building. So think about that. We're in 2028, you would be walking into a building if you started today. So that's why we do these master plans. So for tonight, we have 7 options, just to try to confuse you. We'll walk you through each one. And what I will say is, as we go through the 7, they get progressively, I'll call it innovative, different. And the intent of that is to spark dialogue and debate and discussion as to what's right for your community. So option 1 is what we call middle school swing. And step 1 would be you build a new hill crest, keep it 6 to 8 on the existing site. So what does that do? It allows you to use the existing hill crest as swing space for potentially step 2, Booth Hill. You would renovate that at a capacity of 528 students, add, renovate, modify. You could do step 3, Daniel's Farm, at same grade level configuration at 506. And then you could also look at, and this is where Long Hill kind of got kicked towards the tail end of the priority list, where it was kind of, we'll just work on capital improvements as part of step 4. So that addresses some, not all of the needs in this first kind of swing. Could Jane Ryan be interchangeable with either Daniel's Farm or Booth Hill? Sure. That's some of the dialogue we invite tonight. So total project cost, when you add up what you see on the screen, is large, right? It's $269 million, and the total cost to Trumbull is $197. So again, that's over a significant period of time. Should you choose it? Should you choose to change the combination, change the schedule? There's a myriad of things you can do with these options to modify them as you see fit. So the detail behind option 1 on the right-hand side, step 1, we would fold reach into whatever build was Hillcrest. So you see the numbers there. Booth Hill, you see the numbers for renovate as new for a K to 5. It would be about 60 million, and then the cost of Trumbull, 40, and then same thing for Daniel's Farm. So that detailed spreadsheet that I had showed you, that's behind every single one of these steps. So in summary, that's kind of what you're looking at for option 1. So option 2 is, what if you were to just do them one at a time? So we did that analysis. Could you do a renovate as new? Could you build new? You could certainly do it on most of the sites, not without pain, but you certainly could do it. So you could start with Booth Hill and do a renovate as new or new. You could go to then the Hillcrest, then you could go to Daniel's Farm. Again, same comments here. Could you use maybe Jane Ryan or even Middlebrook interchangeably? Sure, if collectively some of the prioritization changes through discussion. Looking at possibly a new Long Hill admin at the Madison School once Reach is moved out from that building. So what does this look like from a cost perspective? On the left-hand side, for the new buildings, it's 283 versus 219. And then for renovate as new, because you see you have the options here to do new or renovate as new. That's the difference. Same grade level configuration, same essential size of building, same student population. When people ask, and I think there was some very good questions last time, new versus renovate is new, that's the differences. So when you look under the hood on this one, You see the details here, so we can certainly go back to that if you have questions. And yes, there's some eye-popping numbers here, but again, it's all based on historical information. And again, we've escalated those to 2026. So option 3 is basically just leave what you have and fix it on a yearly basis, right? So fix mechanical systems, fix lighting systems. So the number that you see in the bottom left is how we arrived at that number is pretty simple math. You have 1.1-ish million square feet in your district for schools. If you take an average square foot to replace building systems, finishes in your building, you're talking anywhere from $275 a square foot to $385 a square foot. So we took the mid-range of that times all of your schools, all of your buildings, and divided by 30. So if let's just assume it, for instance, that something is, windows are going to last 30 years, or roof's going to last 30 years, those are easy things to understand. You would have to spend anywhere from 10 to 14 million on average per year to, in 30 years, go back around to the same roof that you replaced in this year. So is it exact science? No. I know you folks live this on a yearly basis. Some of the challenges on this are sometimes there's less reimbursement depending on the project. There is no change to the educational environment other than better conditioned space from a mechanical perspective and more energy efficient lighting, but we're not reinventing the buildings. There could be a continuous disruption. These projects oftentimes, and I think everybody's experienced this, where you have to pick a priority and some of them get cut, which is fine. And then basically the pieces stay. So what you have today stays. We're not touching the building overall from an educational perspective. So this is where we start to get a little bit more, I guess, creative or courageous. We looked at, in this particular one, introducing the idea of new intermediate schools on the east and west side. It adds buildings to your portfolio. What it does, if you go through step 1, is it instantly provides relief across the district to the elementary schools, right? So you're feeling that pinch now. It would take basically 500, more or less 500 students from each of the collectively about 1,000 students out of all of the elementary schools. So you'd reduce some of the capacity crunch in all of the elementary schools with this option. You could then go back, whether it's step 2 or step 1 or somewhere before or after that, look at a renovate as new to Hillcrest, and then you could then look at a renovate as new with the new grade level configurations. So these come down, you can see the change, right? So Booth Hill's around 500 plus today. It comes down to, when you pull 4 and 5 out, it comes down to around a 330, 350 level, and that's pretty consistent across your district between the schools, and you can see that for Daniels Farm too. So my caveat remains, could you look at Jane Ryan and do the same thing before Daniels Farm, before Booth? Certainly. And then you can see the numbers in detail, what happens to those schools from a population perspective. And same thing with Frenchtown. And then lastly, we could look at either relocating Reach or put Reach in Hillcrest. There's a variety of options that we could look at, and then maybe address the Long Hill administration towards the last end of that step. So all of those steps are about 367 million, 265 to the town of Trumbull, and then the detail on how you get there. And again, look at the number, look at the years here and when you could pull this off. So we're talking, in some instances, 5, 10, 15 years from now, possibly. That's the number, that's the breakdown of the numbers. So grade 5, a little bit different, same idea. Instead of the grade level configuration we had shown, maybe look at a 5-6. What that does is it relieves some pressure on your elementary schools and your middle schools. You can see those academies, as we call them, are a similar size to the intermediate schools that we were proposing, about 550. So decent size, right-sized, I would say, when you look at the portfolio of your buildings. And then you see the impact it has on the rest of the elementary schools there. And then you could, again, look at Hillcrest and then look at Madison. Those become 7-8, drop the student count a little bit, try to right-size those, find some efficiencies in those, keep what's best of those buildings and renovate them. Booth Hill, you could step in and look at that. K to 4 was 432 students, and then Daniels Farm, as I mentioned, same caveats. You could flip some of those around. But you start to see what it does from a capacity perspective. And then, of course, Reach and Long Hill. So that doesn't have to be step 6. We could look at different combinations, but we wanted to make sure to include them. So when you start collecting more of these buildings in these steps, it becomes obviously more money. So do all of these have to take place? No. Could you look at that first step, 5-6, 2 of those? Certainly. What does that look like? It's more palatable if you look at each one of these. They're in the 70, 77, 78 range, and then the total cost to the Trumbull in the 60 range. So again, the detail here. And the numbers in each of these change because of the grade level configuration of the student population. So as you build a new building to relieve some pressure, you're going to right size those. Almost there, almost there. 6 is the integration starting at 5th. So instead of building more buildings, do we look at recreating them and building a 5-6 on one side at the Madison site and building a 7-8 on the Hillcrest site? Could they be new? Could they be renovated as new? They could be both. Look at the population here now. So now you're starting to get, and this isn't terribly large, but it certainly increases the size of your schools. It's about 1,000 pupil 5-6 and about 1,100 7 and 8. What that does, it does the same thing, right? It gives you the additional capacity in the elementary schools, and then you can go around and renovate them at your will and at your priority. Again, a much larger number than some of the early options that we're studying. But if you start looking at, the total project cost for the first 2, when you start combining those and making larger buildings, 1,000 pupil or 1,100 pupil buildings, the numbers become much larger for those build outs. And then option 7 that we were looking at, and it was, do we look at, similar to the high school, do we look at just one middle school? And this was an ask just to study it, to see what impact it has. Not saying this is a recommendation or a preference, but that's what it would look like. About 1,600 students. And then same philosophy, you're pulling a grade level out of your elementary school, so it gives you some relief. And then you could look at options for Hillcrest. Could you flip Hillcrest in Madison? Could you put a 6 to 8, all 6 to 8 on Hillcrest and vice versa for Madison, and use that as swing space? Certainly. So those numbers are the 394 and the 293. And when you look at that's one large building, right? So the step 1 is a significantly sized building. Again, we're not necessarily recommending it, but it's good to start looking at these to compare the options, to understand kind of what's happening throughout the district when you choose and look at these options. So we did receive some feedback from the hits on the superintendent's distribution of the presentation, and this is a summary of those, which we think it's great feedback and definitely worth considering. I tried to fold into the presentation the idea that Middlebrook and Jane Ryan you could balance it across the district instead of doing Booth Hill and Daniels Farm. You could maybe do a Booth Hill and a Jane Ryan, or some combination thereof. The benefit of that is that the SRP and some of the specialized education spaces related to that live in Middlebrook, and that would be addressed earlier on. So that's an interesting comment and idea. And then the other idea or suggestion was to look at a K building, and it's worth looking at. We didn't have as much time to really put all the numbers to it, but what could happen is you'd likely want to put the K on the TechEc site, which is the Middlebrook site. So just to confuse you even more with other options, what you could do is you could build a new K next to TechEc, and then then you could start phasing the Middlebrook and Jane Ryan, because we don't think, and we haven't studied that detail, but we don't think you can fit 3 buildings, a TechEc, a K, and keep Middlebrook on the same site. That's a lot going on there. But it's worth taking a look at. So we appreciate those comments, and believe we are at a stopping point where we'd like to invite feedback, comments, questions, concerns. I can leave this slide up, and we can start the dialogue. So who's first?
I had a question on the cost methodology from the last presentation. So it's, as you explained tonight, it's $26 at 4.5 a year. I'm not sure that those costs are in all of the subsequent slides. I don't know. It was a question. Are you $26 throughout all of your presentations? I'm picking on parking. Parking's $10.250, and then it drops the other slides. So I just had a question on that. Do school costs compare to commercial costs or other government facility costs? So for example, the parking lots are $10.250 per space. Does a school parking lot cost more than a strip mall or a library parking space? And similarly, the new construction costs are $5.35 per square foot. Will community center cost more or less than this amount? Is there something special about schools? I really liked option 1 or option 2. I wrote in my comments that I handed you that I was skeptical of the intermediate options or the single middle school options. I'm warming up to the intermediate options on each side of town. I'm not a fan of, like, our high school kids go from all over town, have long bus rides to one facility. I don't want to do that down a couple of grades. I'm not a huge fan of that. I'd also like to comment for a later start time to our high school students while I have some of you all here. And then my last was on the pool. In your earlier presentations, there are 3 pictures of Coach Bill standing next to an empty pool at Hillcrest. I'm not seeing any plans for that in any of these options. Will be added to Hillcrest, will be added to the administration building plans. So I'm seeing pictures of a closed pool to help justify the needs, but I'm not seeing options for a new pool in any of the presentations or options. And then finally, does Long Hill, is there a reason that it's not associated with a school? Does it have to be kept separate? Does it have to be a town facility? In my realm of commercial property data, my world of commercial property data, there's a ton of office space out there. I don't know what it is in Trumbull, but does it have to be on a town property? Does it have to be not associated with a school? Thanks.
So I'll do my best to answer them, and if I miss, please let me know. So the cost methodology, so the parking, cost for parking changes a bit, depending on the order of magnitude, so there's some sense of scale. So yes, they modify slightly depending upon each site. You know, we take a harder look at each site when we're doing those test fits to understand that. So it's consistent amongst, you know, that application. So we're not trying to favor one or the other. We're just really looking at, like, what does that site entail? Is it difficult to get to it? Is there more to it? Those kinds of things. Why is the cost so high, and is it different than strip mall parking or some other use? The way that we budget the parking is based on, so you have things like heavier duty pavement for things like bus drop-off and bus queuing and parent drop-off, so there's a longevity there. So there's a little bit of a difference from a constructability standpoint, so there's a cost premium there. But we also include in that is the stormwater quality, water collection, which is something that's basically newer to some of the older sites that you have. So those are reflective of what we're seeing on current school projects. So new construction, is there something special about schools? I like to think there's a lot of special things about schools, but there's guidelines that we need to follow that do impact costs, right? So there's the OSCG&R standards, there's building codes, there's energy codes, there's changes in air exchanges in schools that are higher than, you know, some other uses. So yes, there are differences. I won't say premiums, there are differences. And then we also have the compliance with school safety infrastructure guidelines. So there's things in there that I won't illustrate in great detail, but there's a lot of different techniques that you're expected to include in your projects if you have a grant with the state, like security film, for example, cameras, those kinds of things. So there are differences. I wouldn't say premiums. And we were careful collectively as a team to monitor those costs, because what you also see in there is a cost, and in the detail, you probably not necessarily this presentation, but previous ones, there's a green line where it says there's a premium for PV and geothermal. So those prices include basically getting you to a carbon-free net neutral building as well. Do you have to do that? Not necessarily, not right now, but you might, depending on the legislature. So we tried to include a comprehensive list in the costs. Heard you on the long bus rides. We had the same, I think we illustrated those in the challenges of the 5-6, or where we had one school on one side of the district and one school on the other. That's definitely, thank you for that. The pool, I know there's other efforts ongoing outside of our realm related to that. We have not included any kind of pool in any of the elementary, middle schools. We don't often see it. The state really changes their reimbursement rates when it comes to that. So we would repurpose, reuse or repurpose or discard that space in some of those options, but we would not, at least unless directed to, include that. And then lastly, Long Hill. No, it could be, we've studied Long Hill. I think, you missed the last one, but we'll make sure that one's posted. We showed a possible new build on that site. It could be a school, could be anything. There's room, there's capacity on that site towards the rear. So you could reinvent that for school otherwise, certainly. I think I got them all. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a teacher at Hillcrest. I'm a Trumbull resident, and I have a daughter in the Trumbull schools. Safety being a primary concern with the climate that we're in, a renovation versus a new building. If it's a new building, you get all the latest and greatest with, safety pieces put into it. If you renovate, are you compromising any of the latest and greatest safety pieces to keep our children and our staff safe in the building? Like, is there anything that you just can't get with a renovated building that you can get with the new building? And then a second question also, unrelated also, and this is not just to the engineers, but probably to Dr. Semmel and Mrs. Tesoro at the same time. One of the issues having Hillcrest and with Trumbull High is the traffic pattern and the traffic coming in. Is there a possibility of doing something with the traffic pattern, including Daniels Farm Road to Route 25 to help with the flow of traffic? We had a meeting where we had to leave Hillcrest yesterday and go down to Madison. It took me about 20 minutes to get from getting into my car in the parking lot at Hillcrest just to get to the traffic light at Route 25. It took about 20 minutes to do that. So you had mentioned about town projects also to tie them in. Is that something that has been considered or could be considered?
Thank you for your questions. So I'll take the safety one first. And whether it's renovated as new or new, you still need to comply with the school safety infrastructure guidelines. So a large majority of the safety techniques, design standards can and will be incorporated into whether it's a renovated as new or new. I would say probably the one thing that we couldn't change is the building location, right? Because we're reusing it. So the placement of the building on the site is, if there is a compromise, and I wouldn't even call it that, would probably be the only item up for discussion related to safety. Is it in the front of the site? Is it in the back of the site? How do we protect it? How do we delay, deter, set up the proper safety that we'd like to see in contemporary schools? So I don't think you're necessarily, you will be able to incorporate the safety measures into both schools, no doubt, undoubtedly. It's really, that's the only thing I could think of, unless Eddie or Antonio, you guys can think of something different.
No, the placement of the building and configuration, sometimes, Yeah, to Jeff's point, sometimes the configuration of the building, where there are, kind of nooks and crannies, you're not going to change those. But again, if you plan for things intelligently, you should be able to mitigate that. But otherwise, no, in terms of the materials, the infrastructure, the systems, it would all be the same, renovate as new versus new.
And I'm not going to touch the traffic one out beyond the schools, but I will say that so traffic studies, traffic analysis, entry, egress into the school sites would all be analyzed as a part of whether it's a renovated as new or new. Traffic studies will be done. Anything off-site, unfortunately, for anything related to school reimbursement is not reimbursable. So we certainly would look at it and the impact of it and understand what's happening. And if there are other projects in the community, we'd work with the various different boards to make sure whatever we find for the school is coordinated with that effort. But I don't want to answer unless there's others that know of other road improvement projects. I don't. No. Okay. I think I answered both. Great.
Hi, Steve Spillane, Trumbull parent and fifth grade teacher at Daniels Farm. I'm mostly speaking on behalf of the families and the 10 and 11-year-olds with some concerns in possibly through 4 through 7 that were up there. Some things that were kind of glossed over at one point, showing a school of 1,000 kids that was just 5th and 6th graders. That puts the 5th graders in a class of 500 or to 600, same as Trumbull High School. Teaching 5th graders and being a parent of 5th graders, I don't want 5th graders in a class the same as my senior in high school. So that's a big concern. And it also seems to miss kind of the point that Trumbull High School's elementary and middle schools, particularly award-winning, highly rated, highly ranked, And I appreciate there's a lot of concerns with the buildings, and, I mean, what is it, number 3 there? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that's all loaded with just all negatives so that nobody can pick that one. But it's more like the model that we have, it's not that it's just good, it's thriving in Trumbull. And as homeowners, as parents, I think that's something we definitely want to preserve as we go. Just looking through towns similar in population, I couldn't find one that has a 4th or 5th grade school as big as some of the ones that are proposed here. At least not one where it's their only 4th or 5th grade school. So there's some real concerns for me, and as I would think for families in some of those designs. Whereas the renovate like new, where you get your funding back, or the building new schools, like we did a few years ago with Frenchtown, didn't disrupt this outstanding model that we have in Trumbull. So I just hope that gets considered as well as we go. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment, and I didn't mean to gloss over the size of the schools, but you're right, and we've heard those comments from others, from our other community conversations, so thank you for that.
Yeah, hi, Jonathan Disney. I think I have a similar comment or question. I'm impressed by everything overall. I'm not a big fan of the 4th and 5th grade or 6th and 7th grade mega school, but it does bring up a question. Did we look at reducing the number of elementary schools from 6 to 4 or 5? Building a larger elementary school kind of transitions into that, puts it on a smaller site potentially if you go vertically, and reduces some of the overhead for administration potentially. I don't think any of the plans looked at that.
It's a good question. I believe in our community conversation number 3, we talked about it. We didn't show graphically to the extent that we presented tonight, but that's something worthwhile taking a look at. I think the challenge that we need to wrap our head around is those buildings are already at capacity, and a large majority of the sites are tight, but it's not to say that it's not possible, so it's worth looking at.
Correct, especially if we build new, then instead we would only have to build potentially 2 new to cover 4 areas. Looking at Jane Ryan and Middlebrook as one, and potentially Daniels Farm and Booth Hill as a second one. That would give us 2 buildings, because I would wonder from the construction costs, we're looking at these overall projects, but it would be good to look at it from a cost per square footage, cost per student base, student affected as well. Which ones are most cost efficient.
So thank you for those comments. Those are great suggestions, and we'll take a look at that.
Daniel Durden, 5 Haverhill Road. Tecton, thank you very much. Very comprehensive. I'm very impressed with the options you present us with, and it's refreshing to be able to ask questions, get answers right away. With it, all board meetings were like that. A couple comments, and it's to the audience at large. Remember when $1 billion used to be a lot of money? The gravity of the decisions we're making here are quite substantial. It didn't hit me until tonight, and maybe there's 15 people in the audience that aren't directly related with the school system or employees or with the project. I'd love to see more people from Trumbull. I don't know how to get them here, but if anybody has ideas, grab your friends, because we are talking about like $1 billion spending on schools in the relatively near future, and very big questions. There's so many options, so much to talk about, but I think as a town, we need to consider how much we want to be one town. I love the idea of talking generationally. Trumbull is it one town on paper, but 2 towns in practice? Because we have this highway going right through the center of town. Is there a way that generationally we can think, hey, are there ways to connect each side of town? Because otherwise we're looking at hour bus drives, anybody that's going from one side of town to the other. So to the first selectman, first select woman, to the board, to the people at large, do we want to be one town long term? Because this is a generational discussion, and let's start having that discussion. And then also to tie into this, what are our kids' time worth? Putting someone in a bus for an hour in the morning and at night, how do we put that into calculus? What is that? How do we put that in a time frame? I don't have any answers, but those are the kind of things we need to decide, I think, before we look at the nitty-gritty of all these options here. So I don't have questions for the group. You've done a great job. I have comments and more questions for the town and what we'd like to do going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm a parent of two daughters, one who attends Madison and another who will be a rising kindergartner at Middlebrook. So I love that you've taken other comments from your previous community discussions around Middlebrook Elementary specifically. After looking at the data, I understand Middlebrook is the second oldest building that was in your study and then actually the oldest school in the district. It's also the second largest elementary school by enrollment. I know from my own daughter's experience at Middlebrook, I think this is also happening at Jane Ryan, but she didn't have an art room. Art was in a cart, because they needed that space due to the heavy enrollment that we were seeing. And the same for music. So she went through some of her career, just staying in a single classroom. And that's not happening at other elementary schools in our district, just again, due to the enrollment. I think the demographic studies, again, highlights that Frenchtown, Middlebrook, and Jane Ryan are in more densely populated areas here in town. I don't think that's a surprise. But there was another analysis that actually showed that would continue to trend upward, just given as other developments and things are coming online. And so I'm just curious, all of this makes sense for today, but we're really talking about a complex issue that is going to look different. Trumbull is going to look different in 10 years. So I just would like to understand, there weren't any options here that actually show a combination of expanding certain schools rather than just renovating like new. I'd be interested to see what that looks like. A combination of expansion and then also redistricting. I think that's the big elephant in the room. I know that you've said, okay, that's it in the proposal you've presented. That doesn't make sense for us to only look at redistricting, but certainly I think just looking at the way these lines are drawn, we're not addressing issues long-term in a meaningful way, again, just given the trends that we're seeing. So that was a very long first point. The other thing that I wanted to raise is around the teaching staff to support for the intermediate where we're, actually building new buildings. What does that look like in terms of teaching staff to support the additional buildings? I don't know if those costs have already been calculated. Obviously, that's a huge consideration given our budget. And so I'm just curious to see how that works in tandem with ensuring that, okay, the buildings look great, but we need state-of-the-art educators, right? And so I don't care if I do care, but I would like the buildings to look great and support healthy learning environments. But I think what comes first is ensuring that we have the right talent to be able to continue providing a best-in-class education for our students. The last thing I'll note here is I'm concerned about the experience of students if we go with one of the options where, we'll have students in swing schools. I'm concerned about their actual experience because they will be going through a lot of transition, and it's the same thing for the intermediate options as well. I know for us, we're looking at this and that's a timeline of 10 to 15 years, and that we understand that as adults. But for those students that are going through that transition, that's pretty much their entire academic career, right? That's an entire class that's going through, and not really, I'm concerned that they won't have that real structure that at least we know now. Like for the most part, most of the elementary schools are zoned to either of the middle schools, and then, yes, all the kids typically, many of the students come together in Trumbull High. It seems messy to me with the way the current districts are, the way that they're zoned. How does that affect the step up, right, from that transition? Like, will students still be more or less staying together? Regardless, I mean, it's a lot of transition to put our young folks through. So thank you.
So there were some very good comments there. I didn't hear too many questions, but I did just want to clarify one thing that I think Eddie was looking at me, because I guess I didn't do a good enough job describing it. When we talk about renovate as new, we're talking about renovations, completely reinventing the building and adding to it if needed from a capacity perspective. So just want to make sure, and I apologize if I didn't make myself clear when we were talking about renovate as new, it's basically right-sizing the building for the largest number of students in an 8-year window. So so whatever that is, that's what the building size will be. If we need an addition, it will accommodate it. So it'll be a complete reinvention of the building, renovation of the building, plus an addition if it's needed for capacity. And thank you for, I think, the number of transitions for some of those options. I think we can certainly clarify those in our benefits and challenges column on the right-hand side. I didn't speak to too much when I was going through the slides, but I think listing those out, I think are all very good comments, so we'll do that. Thank you.
Just also wanted to point out, you mentioned about, the art on the cart and the lack of music. So that was something that we actually covered in one of the prior conversations when we talked about, like, when we analyzed the existing buildings in terms of their capacity, their programmatic capacity, that was the sort of thing that we looked at. And, to the point of, I think it's well said that this is a great school system. And so, we're trying not to completely overhaul things. And, the point about, maybe if it ain't broke, don't fix it sort of thing, or fix it when it breaks. But that's why we, wanted to look at some of the new and the renovate as new schemes for some of these schools, because not only the art and the music, but special education. There's a lot of spaces that are being stuffed into closets, and there's, programs that are taking place only in space that's available. So it's not just renovating when systems break, but it's also trying to make sure that there's space inside the building for all the programs that need to take place to properly educate the children.
Before you go, I asked that question last time, and you were wrong. I didn't bring it up. I brought it up to you last time. You had no input. The middle schools are all indicated as positive. And I said to you, I'm getting the answer. The answer is still out. No one has to get the answer. It's what's happening is politics. You have nowhere to go. So you have to expand. That's what this whole thing is about. It's about the expansion of all these buildings. You have no kids to go in. What? This should have been done years ago. All these budgets should have been done years ago. Not it's too late. We're talking about millions of dollars that the taxpayers have to pay, that the departments don't have to pay. Why do we? Why aren't you something? That's what I'm here for. Answer our questions.
Michael Fleeman, got a fifth grader at Frenchtown and a toddler on the way. Thank you for putting together a really good presentation. I can see you put a lot of thought into different options, and some of it's out of the box thinking. A lot of your options, just the nature of the buildings and what you're doing, had built-in swing spaces and where students were going to go. Can you provide some more clarity on the option where you were replacing the buildings as you go one at a time, what the swing space for the students would be with regards to just going and replacing Booth Hill or the individual buildings themselves, because there really wasn't an inherent swing building or that wasn't very clear. Thanks.
Sure, let me just feed that back to you one time. So The options where we're building at Hillcrest, the options where we're targeting a new build on the Hillcrest site, let's say you build the new middle school, you would then use the existing Hillcrest Middle School for pick a building. If you were to renovate as new Booth Hill, you would move them in for a year and a half, couple years, while they're renovating Booth Hill, where the students aren't. What we're trying to do is get the students off of that campus as best we can into another building. And the only way to do that in that particular option for swing space is to build a new build and then move them to, the existing Hillcrest. That's one option. We also looked at, and I'll pick on Jane Ryan, can you build a new building either behind or in front of it while the existing Jane Ryan is occupied safely? We've done this quite often. And then when the new building is done, move the students into there and then remove the existing Jane Ryan and finish your site work. So that's two different ways of looking at swing space. And then the last way to look at swing space is in a renovate as new. What we try to do is we try to build an addition to the building first, say 4, 5, 6 classrooms, so that you can then take a portion of the building where those classrooms are and move them into that new building, that new addition, and then go through the building one at a time. So if that's still unclear to the group, I think I can pull up the kind of the phasing and logistics that we presented at the community conversation number 3. But so there's kind of, I hope I clarified, but there's 3 different ways that you can create that swing space where we're trying to avoid things like, temp modulars and stuff like that.
Hi, my name is Amanda Harmon. I'm a social worker. I'm an alumni of the Trumbull Public School. I have 2 toddlers who will be in the Trumbull Public Schools. I don't have a lot of questions. I do want to thank you because I definitely, from the last meeting to this meeting, I appreciate the, potentially looking at doing a Booth Hill, Jane Ryan, Booth Hill, Middlebrook, because that equity is important, particularly for our SRP students who are housed right now in the basement of Middlebrook. And when we talk about, beautiful sensory rooms and things like that, those are the students that need the access to that. I just wanted to make 2 comments. In terms of getting more people from town here, being here at 6 to 8, I'm not going to see my kids. This is not an easy time to get people to be able to come here to talk about these things. The other piece, and a lot of people will disagree with me, but I'm not good at keeping my mouth shut, is that no one's moving to Trumbull for the 400 pickleball courts and the parks. We have a shell downtown. We have vibrancy in the towns that surround us. So this is it. This is it. This is the diamond ring. And what are we willing to invest in this to continue to draw people to move here if we're not investing in creative, innovative programming in our town? That's not happening. We have Parks and Rec that offer programs that are only during traditional times that toddlers with non-working parents or grandparents can access. We, have a lot of things lacking, so this is it. And I think it needs to be a larger town conversation of if we're going to make investments that continue to draw people moving here to own homes and keep acreage and not building apartments on apartments on apartments because there's nothing else that's coming in to fill those spots. Are we going to make that commitment or not? And it's going to cost money. It is unfortunate that those conversations weren't happening 10, 15 years ago, but they're happening now. And we do need to make some decisions because, again, if we're looking at other towns and from whether it's you know, their what's been done externally to what's been done internally to, you know, technology access, air conditioning. I mean, Hillcrest should be air conditioned by now. It wasn't when I was there. I'm going to be 43. You know, we have climate change. We had 90-degree days in winter. I mean, you know, we need to sort of have a bit of a reckoning about where are we heading and what are we willing to put in place for our children, but also for, you know, for those who don't have children in the school system to be able to, you know, to leave with some equity in their homes and to continue to draw people in rather than to Shelton, Monroe, Fairfield.
Albert Mass Street, 68 Bonneview Drive. I'm just going to make my opinion. I don't know the quality of all these schools. Obviously, I haven't been in, you know, many of them, you know, there's always plumbing. I'm in the business for 30 years. And I just don't understand, if you're going to do it and it's cheaper to do brand new, why would you even think about renovating? You know, I do remodeling. It's always more expensive to renovate. Knock it down, build something new. But once again, I've also found, and I've done a lot of work for towns, that there's a tremendous amount of waste. They do a lot of things that are unnecessary. I've watched them rip down beautiful playgrounds and put up one just because it was for Sandy Hook. I mean, it wasn't even half the size of the one that was there. I find there's a lot of waste when it comes to the cities and states, and I just hope if you do it, you don't waste a lot of money. And as far as that reach thing, you said there's 12 kids that go there and you're going to build a building for $6 million? You can't just add that into another school? 12 kids at $6 million? And isn't it true that when you built the firehouse, was it supposed to be $4 or $5 million and it went to like $7 million? Was it over budgeted for like $2 million? So once again, there just seems to be a lot of waste when the money's given. It just seems like it gets thrown away, and I hope you don't do that in this project.
Hi, my name is Janet. I have a daughter in Hillcrest here. I just had a general question about what it would look like, specifically, I guess, about Daniels Farm Elementary. When you do a new build, for the kids that are going to be in the school for their day-to-day, something like recess, or do they lose their playground? Because I mean, that's like 100% of their day in importance to them. So will just for like a day-to-day, will that go away for them? Because for the health of them, is that something that disappears while this is being built, or?
No, thank you for the question. It's a great question. So some of the analysis we did versus new versus renovated is new in those test fits. Ideally, we would have spaces for temporary play during construction. So the answer is yes. And if there will be some sacrifices, right? So there'll be, a construction fence around that area, and then there'll be there'll be some activity actually ongoing to make that building happen, whatever site it becomes. But in an ideal, we do it often. In an ideal world, we'll have the school operating. We'll have some sacrifices on bus and parent drop-off, but we'll also have outdoor play and outdoor education. Yep. Thank you.
Hi there, Sarah Epperson. I have a son in Daniels Farm and a daughter that will be there. I want to say, of course, thank you again. We love Daniels Farm. We love the neighborhood feel of this town. So I appreciated, I think the very first slide in the call out, it said neighborhood feel. Great, plus, like, subscribe. I'd also like to request that at the next meeting or the next presentation, as the other Trumbull Bomb alluded to, like a timeline that doesn't say 5 years or 10 years, but how long those builds take to renovate or to build a new building. 18 months, great. Can we get a more realistic timeline with the amount of approvals that the town will need? When will budgets be passed? Those types of things. Even if it's conservative, realistic, insane timelines, it'd be great to see that, because I think that would maybe help the community in understanding the impacts. And I'm a +1 on option 1. I think it's the biggest bang for your buck, least disruptive to the town. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. And timeline, yes, I thought we had some in Community Conversation 3. If we didn't, we will make sure those are posted. We'll post a, I guess, a typical timeline from start to finish so that you could see for renovation and new construction. So good question. Thank you.
Hi, Dan Schreck. I have one kid in Tashua and another one that will be going to Tashua. The option that I seem to gravitate towards would be the option 5, which is the academies, bringing in a school for 5 and 6 on both sides. The reason I kind of like that one is, as you alluded to, it would relieve pressure at both the middle school and elementary school levels. So that would relieve pressure across the whole district in that 5-year time frame, as opposed to a lot of the other options where when you're doing one school at a time, it's going to take 20 plus years to get to some of these schools and deliver actual pressure relief on them. Whereas if you build that 5 or 6, it really, after that 5-year build time, it's going to pull pressure off of all the schools and give them classroom space to do that renovation in place, where you can shift people around if you're already filling up or freeing up 4 or 5 classrooms per school. But one question I did have is, that option was 130 million more than the intermediate introduction, which was also the addition of 2 new schools. And I was curious why 2 new schools versus 2 new schools is 130 million difference. I know one is a 4 or 5 school and one is a 5-6 school, but is there really 130 million difference between a 4-year-old and a grade 4 and a grade 6? Thanks.
Thank you for your comments and thank you for the question. So the reason why I put this second slide in for options, right? So when we walk through the options, when you look at the total number on this slide, it's totaling up all those steps, right? All those projects. So when you look under, the hood here, those academies are, you want to look at step 1, right? For what you're talking about. So comparing that versus maybe option 1 or 2, you'd want to look to see how many steps you have to do in option 1 to get to where you would start relieving some pressure like this option does. So I guess my short answer is the entire district K to 8 will feel an improvement in their buildings with just step 1 of this option. So call it 150, 160 million.
Hi, my name is Rochelle Giordano. I have children at Daniels Farm School and a child at Hillcrest. And I've participated in PTA and had discussions across other elementary schools. So I understand the pain and the desire to have more capacity at each of the schools. And I also understand that it's probably hard to choose once you get down the list because there's so much need that goes across all the schools. One of the things didn't understand, and I apologize, I probably missed it. There are capacity numbers in some of your slides for what the schools will get to, and I don't understand how that incorporates the numbers of what could be projected for 5 years down the road. So are we creating schools that are going to be at capacity in 5 years? Are they allowing room for growth? Because Trumbull is wonderful, and I could see many people coming here for those reasons. And then just an opinion, I personally feel that options 4, 5, and 6 are a little troubling from the perspective of a child who has to shift between that many different schools. I've got a 5th grader, and he's really excited about Hillcrest, but there's also some trepidation there. And I can't imagine putting my children through that so many times just till they get to high school. New friends, new teachers, new building, new habits. So, thank you.
So I won't say that you missed it, but no, under community conversation number 3, we did take a deeper dive into the capacity, and the capacity charts that are in there compare today's enrollment for each school to the highest enrollment in a 10-year window. And there's a blue line in there, and I can try to go to it. That is really based on the maximum, it's based on the allowable area from the state guidelines. So that's how we did the capacity analysis. I'm not sure if that necessarily answers your question, because you have to look at capacity and then utilization of the building, like how much can you for one building may have 12-foot corridors and another building may have 8-foot corridors. So I guess you call it wasted space. You have an inefficient building that you can't use educationally. So it's a good comment. We'll think on how to better articulate that in a graphic. It's a good question. And I think that's the only one. So we are using the forecast to, or we are using the forecast, the demographic forecast, to calculate capacity. So the answer is yes, we're looking at that. But I think we could do a better graphic to illustrate that or communicate that.
Hi, I'm Mom, a 4th grader at Daniels Farm. Thanks for bringing up all these options. Everything is different in each approach. I most prefer for option 1 or 2 because it does not affect any of the kids' standards who goes to which school. I'm a little bit hesitant to go for any intermediate school or at 4th and 5th grade or 7th grade, because if you take 4th and 5th grade, kids are starting at elementary. That is the 4th grade where they want to concentrate more on studies or athletes or whatever they want. If we are asking them to move to the other school and get used to and make new friends, and if we choose for 5th, 6th or 7th year, every 2 years we are asking kids to go with new kids. It's good to explore all the neighborhood Trumbull people, but as a child, they think that they want their friend circle in emotion-wise. And if the kid is 2 years or they want to concentrate, like we are giving extra stress for them by introducing these intermediary things. That is one part. And the next thing is, but most of the parts were covered by Mr. Spillane and my previous speaker. And the next part is like, most of the Trumbull schools are, I can say all of the Trumbull schools are highly rated schools. If we introduce this intermediate school concept, probably until we get that rating, we are taking all those grade levels, ratings to, I don't know, maybe 0 or 1 or I don't know which rating we'd go, which affects all the homes firms or realtor-wise or anything. It affects until we get that standards back. And by introducing these intermediate schools, already we are facing like Trumbull High School kids are coming onto Daniels Farms Road, and so many people avoid this road during the school hours. If we introduce these, every time other part of the Trumbull should go to the other part where wherever we create the new schools, it's going to be a lot of traffic. Not only for the kids. Kids has to spend a lot of time in bus, and the parents who drop and pick, and before school, after school programs, and there are a lot of logistics doing if you're introduced these intermediate or 5th, 6th grade combinations. And next part is like the traffic wise also, like if you take the Daniel Farm Road, it's just 25 to this, and most of the high school kids come in their cars. But elementary and middle school, it's not like that, the logistics. And the next thing I want to bring, timings. Already we did the survey, like to change the timings of the elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. If we introduce intermediate, what are the timings are going to be? How is going to affect all the logistics, kids-wise, parents-wise, and neighborhood where we drive all these schools. That's why I prefer more, just stay with whatever the standards, like kindergarten to 5th grade, 6th to 8th, which matches to most of the country, where the intermediate school concept is very less in the country, I feel. So I feel the better option will be option 1 or 2, not the intermediate concept. Thank you.
Thank you. I assume I'm allowed to come back again. I want to thank everyone who spoke tonight. I think we got a lot of great feedback. I'll say I think a lot of people were waiting for a presentation like this to understand. I was at 1 and 2. We had our conversation with the PTA. I was out of town for 3. This is really the first time these things are tangible. And this makes a big difference when we look at things. I mean, just listening tonight, I never liked the renovate new. That sounds like a horrible experience. And we're looking at it for our own house. It's a horrible experience as a homeowner. It has to be horrible as a teacher, student, parent in that environment. I don't think anyone in this room really think that's a good experience to go through as an individual. And almost 7 options are almost overwhelming. And I don't know if we want to pick number 1 because it's the least bad of the 7 at this point, but I think it makes sense maybe to start eliminating things. We really, as a town, only get a once-in-a-generation opportunity to look at something like this. As much as I respect the decision of the Board of Education, I don't want to race to have them vote on something to bring forward to the town in the next month. I think there's still a lot of feedback from the community that we need to get. I think we need to take this to other places, having more open forums to discuss this, because we do want to come forward with our best approach to bring forward to the town. And I don't think we have our best approach here yet. So I think there is still room to iterate on this. As much as we want to start addressing these sooner rather than later, I don't think anyone wants to spend $250 million or $500 million because it's the least of the bad options that we have. I'm not saying these are bad, but I think as we start to eliminate these and take the feedback, I think we can get a lot better on this. Plus, look at the timing and the logistics of what it will look like from the form of a student to make sure we're not, being unnecessary. I think someone brought out, can it be done in a way such that a student only has to be in the swing space once? I think we've given you good feedback on that tonight to go back and narrow this down to 1 or 2 of the master builds that you have here, and then maybe look at 2 options for each of those. So I'm speaking to this group, and I'm speaking to Dr. Sum on the board that I don't think we're ready yet to make a decision as a community.
Yeah, we're not racing to make a decision. When we originally put this concept together of a master plan, we planned it out from August and said we would shoot for a board meeting in May to make a decision, but there's no hard and fast there.
I think that's
no requirement.
I think that's a good thing.
Right, so we wanted to make sure we continue to have these conversations to see what information we glean from them, and then
continue the conversation.
Yeah, and this is, I think, exactly where the community wants to be at this point. I think we're getting somewhere.
So, hi, good evening. I'm First Selectman Vicky Tesoro. Happy to be here. I've been here for a couple of these meetings and also had a rather in-depth conversation the other day with Tecton as well. I appreciate your time. And I just want to say thank you because this is a lot of work and did a great job. But we still are in the infancy stage of all of this for sure. And I think, what I heard loud and clear from Jonathan and some other people here, we need to take the time we need to do an in-depth discussion with the entire community. This is a decision that actually will be made by the entire community, or at least there will be a vote at some point, not only by the Board of Ed, by the Board of Finance, the Town Council, but actually the entire town, because I don't like to throw a wrench into the discussion, but it's about process. And I think the next meetings we should talk about how you get from point A to build a school. How do you do that? How does it go through the town processes? And under our town charter, we have a referendum provision in our charter that any bonding that is requested that is over 15, that's $15 million, the project has to go to a referendum. So the entire town is allowed to vote and to opine as to whether they want a project to happen or not. So that's why it's so important that this become an entire community conversation. Certainly, parents, absolutely. Most of the people that are here that are not school people, I assume are parents here who have kids in the school system. But there are many people in this town who do not have kids in the school system. I moved here 32 years ago when my kids were 3 and just born. They're now, went through elementary, went through middle, went through high school. Obviously, they're no longer in the school system, but I still live here, and many people still live here that don't have children in the school system. In fact, the data that I saw not too long ago, there are actually more people who do not have children in the school system than do. So that's why it's so important that we reach out to the entire community and make this a community conversation. So I would like at the next meetings, or if it's not the next time or the time after, to be able to provide people with the process of how this will actually work, and so that we're dealing with a realistic conversation. It's great to see all that's up here, but when you're talking about numbers that grow to $400 million, that's a lot of money, and people don't understand how that process works, even though it's over a long period of time. So again, I think the outreach to the community is really important. I would suggest perhaps that we consider doing a hybrid meeting the next time, so that people who are home, who've gotten used to during COVID of, being able to turn their computer on or turn whatever and watch this meeting and participate from their home, I think you'll get more people who will be involved in the process. And certainly I'm more than happy at any time, as Dr. Semmel knows, to sit down and discuss the process so that we can have a really realistic conversation with the community. So thanks.
Is that a question coming up? All right. We are getting close to our end time here, but happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Hi, I'm Kylie. I'm an 8th grader at Hillcrest, and I grew up in Trumbull Public Schools, so I'd just like to mention that even before COVID, the class sizes in especially elementary schools are meant to be smaller. There's more schools of elementary schools, so the teachers are meant to have like a special connection with their students. So if we increase the class sizes significantly, then there's gonna be less of a chance to have those connections with those students. So then it might impact how they grow up as a whole, and especially considering, like, for example, like the 3rd graders right now who didn't have a regular second grade, didn't have a regular first grade due to COVID and stuff like that, what is going to be the regular or normal for them if they don't even know? And especially with like the moving the schools, so if they have to continuously move around, where is their set environment where they can be comfortable with their teacher or be comfortable as an elementary schooler growing up in Trumbull Public Schools?
Great, thank you for the comment, and it's a great one where we should articulate more what that experience would be like. I think there's been a couple other comments relative to what does it look like from a schedule and process perspective, so thank you for that.
As far as class sizes, the intent is not, and we probably should have said this better, but the intent would be with growth in population, it would just mean there would be more sections for each grade. The idea would not be that there would be more students. So in a class, so you still, the student to teacher ratio would still be maintained as it is.
Okay, so we've come to the end of the evening. So we advertised for community conversations. We've heard from, I guess, a great deal of individuals tonight. So thank you for the participation. I think this has been the biggest turnout, which is good, and we'll take into account some of the suggestions relative to platform. But again, our advertisement is the project email and the location for all this information, the documents. So we thank you for all the comments and questions. We'll strive to solidify some of the ones that we couldn't answer, and we'll post those. I think our next step is to have more dialogue with the district relative to honing in on the preferred options. So thank you all.
Yeah, and I want to thank Jeff and his team because they really, as you guys can see, they've done a very, very good job going through all of this data. And I know they have a commitment to making sure we continue to push forward through this process, so I appreciate that. And Mr. Disney, you did say like you don't see us wanting to race to a decision, and I agree with that. But at the same time, because there's been some other comments about maybe we should have started this process 15 years ago, I would also push as the superintendent that we also don't want to wait too long. That there is a sweet spot somewhere in there where we have to make some decisions, and our job as a school system is to say, we're bringing forward to the town, here are the ideas that we have for the school system. We don't pay for the school system, it's the taxpayers. So Mr. Soro's comments are I completely understand and agree with that. We just want to make sure that it doesn't just sit for a few more years as the schools continue to get older. So somewhere there's the race to a decision, and somewhere there's no decision at all. And from our perspective as a school system, we want to make sure we're providing for our students what they need, and to keep Trumbull Schools as a world-class organization. So I cherish looking and continuing to work with Mr. Soro on some of those pieces, because I think it is so critical to have that conversation around that. We have to talk about what is bonding, how much I don't know all these things, like how much can the town borrow, and what does that look like to the taxpayer, and how much does that cost? So I think that's a great suggestion, and I think we should talk between now and the next meeting and figure out how we can have that next conversation. So, and Mr. Soro has been at a number of these and very engaged in this process, so I appreciate that. And we have additional folks here today. But again, thanks to Jeff. I know his team will go back, take these questions seriously. We do have a lot of information on the district website. So if you haven't gone and looked at the different community conversations, there's a lot of data in there. So please take some time to study that, because you'll find a lot of information in there. And if you have additional questions, use the website email address, and we'll get back to you. And you have another question, Ms. McNamee? Yes.
I think Exxon had talked about an additional survey.
Yeah, they had mentioned that today. I know we're going to work with Jeff and his team after we wanted to get some additional information today. He did put it in one of the slides to have some kind, I don't know if you want to add more detail to that, but our plan is to put out a survey to the community. The hard part is I have access to all families. I can send out emails to all families. I think we'll talk to Mr. Sorrell if there's a way. I mean, we put it on the town website, but we don't always get as much engagement from the rest of the folks. So maybe we can talk about other ways to do that. But that'll be, I think you said it'll be coming in the next, we could probably get it out there in a week or so, that survey. So thank you guys for taking the time for coming out tonight. We really do appreciate that. I love the idea of doing a hybrid, probably do it over in Board of Ed headquarters. We have the technology to do all that, and that way people who have trouble with their children or whatever else being here, they can be joining us. So thank you very much for coming tonight.